What's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. And if you're a new viewer here, welcome. I thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm very excited to bring to you a new series I've developed called On the Shelf. Now for me, a big part of collecting is how I have my collection set up and displayed in my sanctuary here so I can get the most enjoyment out of it as possible. So in this series, I will be delving into different options and themes that you can implement when setting up your collection and displays. For this first installment, I am going to be focusing on a Star Wars theme, if you notice with the thumbnail, using some of my Mandoverse figures, and I'm going to keep it simple and play around with using about 4 or 5 figures inside my 6 Series 110 Moji case. Now if you don't have a Moji case, that's okay, because I think some of these can relate to whatever space you have to display your collection. So if you like what you see, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But let's not waste any more time, let's get to it. Okay, let's take a look at our first display option out of 6 here. For this one, I'm going with a theme of individual poses for each figure but displayed together on the shelf. Now, because I'm only using 4 figures for this display, it allows me the space to give each figure plenty of room to breathe and get creative with how I pose them up. The flip side to that though is it can also be difficult to fill a big space and make it look good with fewer figures, so we'll explore that as well as we continue. Now, being an avid collector, I understand that most of us have more figures that we need to cram into our displays, which won't allow this type of space for each figure. But eventually I will play around with how to showcase that in future videos in this series. To kick this off, I want to keep it pretty basic and less chaotic to see what we can do. So here, display 1, it's a pretty standard type of display where you can focus on showcasing each character in their own right. For this setup here, I wanted to do poses that would tell a story for each character and remind me of their individual journey, which I'll touch on as we zoom in on each figure. So let's take a closer look. First up, we have Boba Fett here on the throne, which is a setup I think has great presence on the shelf. For this pose, I decided to have him with all of his armor on, sitting on the throne, looking down at his weapon as if he's getting ready to go to war. Now my purpose for this and having him look down at his rifle was to convey the struggle he seemed to have in this series, Book of Boba. The struggle of being a warrior who wants to settle down and take a different path, but keeps getting pulled into violence. I really do like the look of this piece, and I'm a sucker for a throne or any type of diorama base, even though it does take up a ton of space. Moving on to Bo-Katan here, we have her with the railing part of the diorama piece that comes with her base, and then I have her holding the Darksaber that came with the Chrome Mando. For this pose, I wanted to have her holding the Darksaber to convey the desire she had in Season 2 of Mando to acquire it. A big part of Bo's journey involves the Darksaber, so I think it's fitting to have her hold it, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see another version of her from Season 3 of Mando with a new shoulder piece and Darksaber. I have to say, it's such a great looking figure, but I hope they improve the body they use on the next one for better posability. She deserves it. Moving on to Chrome Mando, which I have to say is one of my favourite figures in my entire collection. Man, I absolutely love this guy. He comes with so much cool stuff, 10 out of 10 for me, easily. For his pose, I have him in the main look that he was advertised with, holding all the supplies he carried in episode 2 of season 2. 1, because it looks awesome, but 2, because I think it also captures the essence of Din Djarin too. Mando comes with a heavy burden, but still does whatever it takes to get the job done. He really is a space cowboy who has so much swagger, heart, and determination, and that's what this pose reminds me of. Finishing up with the last pose on the shelf, Ahsoka. For this pose, I wanted to have her posed up using this cool diorama base she comes with, and I also tried to capture some mystery with it using her cloak to cover her face partially to represent her coming through the darkness right before she starts chopping down fools. This reminds me of her amazing entrance in Mando Season 2 in the woods, and I tell you, that whole sequence blew me away. She was on a mission and I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to see where her story goes in her own show. The figure looks amazing, and even with some of her limitations with articulation, you still have lots of options when posing. Display setup number 2. We have our team in fighting stances, and for this one, I've chosen to go with no stands or diorama bases and just have all the figures together side by side on the shelf. When choosing not to use stands, it can be more difficult to create something dynamic, as you need to first ensure that the figures will balance and not topple over easily. So that does become part of the process when deciding how to have them displayed. Also, if you do choose to do poses like this, be aware that they can take up a fair bit of space. So then the challenge becomes, if you want to fit more figures in the display, you'll need to get creative with angles and levels with how you place them in the space, as to show them all off without losing the desired effect that you're going for. For this, as I've only got 4 figures here, I've spread them out a bit so you can see the whole pose. Zooming in on Mando here, I've chosen to go with the Beskar spear for his weapon of choice. He seriously has so many accessories, it's almost overwhelming the options for posing he has, so each display in this, I've tried to make it a point to use something different, and even then, we aren't even scratching the surface of his possibilities. For this pose, I wanted to go for something more dynamic, as if we're capturing a moment of him having grabbed the spear and in motion of getting into a fighting stance, ready to brawl. I do this with the angle and stance he's in, and then using the wired cape by having it simply imply the wind is catching it, like he's moved quickly. He's ready for war. Moving on to Miss Bo-Katan, we have her coming forward toward us with the Darksaber raised in her left hand and blade out on her right gauntlet. This is a pose where if I was going to use a stand, I'd have her more in motion like a walking stance, not both feet flat on the ground. It'd be more in motion, stepping with her left heel down on the ground out in front to imply she's mid-step. However, I do like this look too, and I think it definitely implies strength. One tweak that I think works well with this angle is her right arm pointing down and then the angle of her wrist curling in. For me, getting poses to really come alive happens within all those little tweaks. Taking a closer look at Boba, we have him in the back raising his weapon, signifying he's also ready for battle. By having him turned side on and leaning back slightly and not fully front on, it conveys he's in a more dynamic and battle ready position. I will say, this being my first Boba figure, I've also been really surprised by how well this guy articulates, and visually I really like the look of this outfit. I think he looks really cool in pretty much any pose you put him in. He also has a ton of options for posing, and I've been really enjoying the different looks he has the potential of pulling off. Lastly, we have Ahsoka, battle ready with both sabers up in a wide stance, ready for war. This pose is actually inspired by the last scene in the trailer to her new show coming out, which I thought looked epic, so I had to have a go at recreating it. This figure really is stunning. I love the posable eyes because for poses like this it really helps sell the look. Unfortunately though, the downside with this figure is her montrals and how her head and neck are. It makes it really hard to get her head in particular angles, which does get annoying when trying to achieve certain looks. For this though, I was able to get it where I think it works. Just be mindful if you're looking at picking her up and you want to get really dynamic looks, that can be a challenge. Okay, taking a look at display number 3 here. Another team up look at the squad in battle. Firstly, I thought I'd give you a look at this one on the turntable before moving over to the shelf, as I normally film my videos here. I wanted to do this so you can see the difference between the two displays and how they can look in a specific setup with specialized lighting versus on the shelf in your display. Now, let's take a look at the same setup on the shelf. For displays like this, I like to play with how they blend together visually as a group, and what I've done by bringing them together close like this is created more room on either side of the shelf to add additional figures. If I had more Mandoverse figures currently, I would show you how to build out the shelf and create a nice big diorama piece. When I do add more to the collection, I will do that at some point. But for now, let's zoom in and take a closer look. Taking a look at Boba first, we have him in an aggressive fighting stance, blasting his flamethrower, whilst raising his left hand gauntlet as if he's about to blast that too. In regards to building out the scene here, I have him facing out to the right, so he is also mirroring Mando on the other side, who's facing out to the left. Again, what has surprised me about this guy is his articulation. He moves so well and balances really well without a stand. I wouldn't have any worries about leaving him in this long term. Moving on to Ahsoka, we have her in a kneeling position front and center looking badass. For this one, I'm using the saber effects that make it look like they're in motion to convey the point she's just landed and swung her sabers downward to deflect some shots or something. Again, I think this is a pretty safe pose to leave her in as her arms are straight, and when it comes to her lower body, there's no issues posing them like this long term. For Bo, we have her elevated, using her jetpack to fly up with both pistols out, blasting fools. Visually, I went this route for a few reasons. One, it allows us to get them all closer together, but also looking at it from front on, it now has levels to it. And bonus, I can hide the riser and flight pole I'm using behind Ahsoka. With all Bo's limitations, I still feel she can hold a pose like this really well as her arms are really stiff, and I don't see them loosening in a pose like this if left long term. Lastly, we move on to Mando and Grogu. I chose to have Mando aiming out to the left, using the whistling birds to play off of Boba with the flame effect on the right, as mentioned. Originally, I wanted to have Mando to be using the flame effect as well, but his flamethrower is on his right gauntlet, so I decided against it as I wanted to have an angle like this. I then gave him the Darksaber to cap off all characters using weapons with both hands. I really love how light bounces off this chrome paint too on Mando. He really is the definitive one. Okay, display number 4, and for this one I wanted to focus on movement. What I mean by this is, I wanted to convey all the figures on the shelf coming forward toward us. I personally love trying to capture movement with my poses, so with a display like this, when I look at it on the shelf, it's like looking at a photo taken in the midst of the action. I will say, if you're trying to capture movement, whether it be walking, running or flying, it can be risky and or impossible to capture certain movements without using stands or dioramas, not to mention not safe to leave on the shelf, so be mindful of that when using multiple figures. The stands and or dioramas also take up a lot of space, meaning you can't fit as many figures in the display when you do it. Starting with Boba, I have him using the base that came with the battle damaged Iron Man Mark 85, and I have him walking forward, pistol drawn, as if he's aiming about to blast or in the midst of blasting at oncoming enemies. There's something I love about walking poses, and there are so many little tweaks and nuances you can play with to create so many different looks when displaying a character walking, and I feel like Boba can pull off a sweet looking walking pose. What do you guys think? Moving on to Mando and Grogu, we have Grogu using his force abilities with both arms up, most likely pushing someone back. And then we have Mando as if he's just hopped up with the Darksaber on top of this rock base here, which I borrowed from my battle damaged Thanos figure. For this pose, I must give a big shout out to a huge infant on Instagram who inspired this pose for Mando. I saw him do this type of pose much better than I have, I must admit, so go check out his page if you're on Insta and give him a follow. I loved it so much, I had to do my own version of it, and here it is. Now, taking a look at Ahsoka. For this pose again, I'm using the Dio base that she comes with, and I have her as if she's stepping up over the tree branches here with both sabers drawn. For her, I wanted to play with her curves to convey movement, having her look sleek while stepping up and forward. For this one, I really played with multiple tweaks to get her like this, which the figure can pull off, and by doing this I made sure to use the angle here to also hide the flight pole as best as possible. To make up for the lack of mobility with her head sculpt, I've tried to pose her eyes to assist with telling the story of where she's looking and focusing, which I think really did help with this look when you zoom in close. Lastly, finishing up with Bo-Katan, I wanted to have her also walking forward like Boba to cap off either side of the display. And I must say I really like her in this pose and could see myself settling on a walking pose for her long term. What I've done to help her balance is use her stand and waist grabber, but I have her walking in front of it to hide the flight pole. And then I use the side railing in a different way to add dimension to the look by putting it to her side, especially as it's on the end of the shelf. I think it creates a nice cap to the display. I tell you, when you zoom in close on this figure too, the true artistry of this figure really shines in all the detail. Display number 5, the diorama. For this one, I really wanted to play around with getting creative and trying to come up with something visually eye-catching and action-packed. These are some of my favourite displays to come up with and definitely the most fun to try to put together. Now, I will say they are space eaters, but for me, it's totally worth it. This is really one of my favourite things about collecting hot toys. The fact that we can use our imaginations to pose and display these figures to create a little world on the shelf is just so much fun for me. So for this display, I decided to bring in some extra diorama pieces, accessories, and my recently acquired Tank Trooper to fulfill the vision I had for this action sequence. Now, let's zoom in and break down the setup. Starting off with Boba. Funnily enough, he was actually the last figure I posed in this display. I have him kneeling with the Beskar spear going through the Stormtrooper helmet that came with the original Durasteel Mando, and my reason for this is, due to the rest of the layout of the display, I think it works better visually having him kneeling when posed with the rest of the team here. Another reason I like having him like this is how he's displayed. He's partially hiding the flight pole for Bo. Maybe it's just me, but I do really dislike seeing flight poles and waist grabbers in my display, so anything I can do to minimize that, I'll do. Moving on to Bo, and for her we have her teaming up with Mando using the flamethrower whilst flying up into the air with her jetpack. Now, I decided to use the big gargoyle base that came with the Thunder Toys Spider-Man figure I have to prop her up, because not only does it add depth to the display, but the height of it and the flight pole allowed me to be able to get her nice and high in this position. I'm also using the fire effect that came with Mando for this, so I could try to create the look of them both flaming something up together. Now, moving on to Mando, Grogu, and the Molten Man base that comes with the deluxe stealth suit Spider-Man from Far From Home. A big shout out to Yunchao632 on Instagram for the inspiration on this pose. Apologies if I'm also mispronouncing your name, I do apologise, I'm terrible with names, mate. But if you haven't done so, do yourself a favour and check out his Instagram. He has amazing hot toy posing and photography on his page. And so, I saw him do a similar pose with his Boba Fett and this Molten Man base, and it gave me the idea to give it a go with Mando in this display here, so here we have it. The cool thing about this base too is it's designed in a way where you can hide the flight pole to pull off a pose like this, which definitely helps when trying to sell this look. Lastly, moving on to Ahsoka and the Tank Trooper I just recently purchased in order to put Pedro's head sculpt on, as I'm sure a few of us have. And we have her using the Force, pushing him back, which in fact was actually inspired from another scene in the trailer to her new show, where she uses the Force to push a foe back. To pull this off, I'm using the Dio base she comes with, but I switched out the crotch holder and used a waist grabber to hold him in place. I just wish he had a better hand sculpt and better head mobility to pull off a look like this, but nonetheless, we do what we can. Then to finish off the look, it was just about getting the angle right for how we will see it on the shelf from front on, and then posing up the Tank Trooper to give off the look of him being knocked back. And that's it, our action scene diorama completed. Okay guys, this brings us to the sixth and final display, the group photo. To finish off, I wanted to bring in the throne once again and make it the centerpiece of the shelf. And then I wanted a way to incorporate everyone's head sculpt, so I thought we'd go with the fairly typical type of display that a lot of people do when displaying their collections. And that's the standard group photo, where we have all our figures standing together and museum-esque type poses. But for this one, I wanted to have them in their museum pose, but posing together, as a scene, much like a group photo. And the cool thing about a display like this is you can fit more figures in, and there's no dynamic poses which may cause long-term harm if left long-term. And that's it guys and girls. I hope you've enjoyed this new style of showcase. There will be more videos in this style coming in the future where I'll experiment with displaying more figures on the shelf together. I thank you all for tuning in, and if you haven't already done so, do us a favor and hit that like button, notification bell, and subscribe to the channel. And if you wish to support the channel a little more, consider taking a look at becoming a channel member and joining the Iron Legion. We have a closed Facebook group and we do once a month live stream hangouts where we chat and pose up figures together for fun, plus much more. Lastly, we got reviews and unboxings, story-styled posing showcases, live streams including my shows Posed Up where I interview fellow collectors and content creators whilst posing up figures, plus the rundown where we deep dive into film and TV. But for now, until next time, live life, have fun, and keep posing. I'm out.